Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher, and in this video, I want to talk about keeping a practice journal. So, many years ago, maybe 10 plus years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to keep a practice journal, and I tried, but really all I was doing was just doing random things in the practice room and then writing down what I did. And it's not surprising I didn't find much benefit to that. And so I think when a lot of people hear about keeping a practice journal, they may do something like that and don't find it very effective. They don't find that it improves their practice or that it's useful information to keep records of. I want to share some three strategies that I've used that have made keeping a practice journal actually positively benefit my own music education. So let's jump right in. The first strategy is just using the journal to plan things out better. And so I find a lot of musicians can be allergic to putting structure in their practice sessions. So, there's nothing wrong with sitting down and kind of just playing your instrument and doing whatever feels good. I think that's a great use of time. It's one of my favorite things to do. I don't do every practice session like that. I don't have an exact number, but I probably do 70 or 80% of my practice in a more structured way, and then maybe something like 20 or 30%, depending on the day, of me just replaying through repertoire and just experimenting with things without a direct plan. But I do think that having some structure is really beneficial for many people and many students. And my own observation with students and with teaching many people piano and guitar and a little bit of drums over the years is that a lot of people think that they are allergic to structure, think that they will not like having a structure in their practice session. So I mean something like I'm going to work on this piece for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to practice improvising for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to do this for 15 minutes. I find a lot of people, they don't like the idea of doing that, which is fair enough. I mean, I'm not saying you have to do that. But what's surprising for me is I thought I was like this. So I thought I was someone who did not like structure, especially using things like timers or making any kind of structured plan. And for some reason, I ended up trying it, and I found that I was learning so much more, but I was also enjoying my practice sessions more. And this can be quite surprising for someone who doesn't consider themselves to be like an organized person or to be structured. But what I find happens is when students are really intrinsically motivated about something, you don't need to really make a practice plan. So if there's a piece you really want to learn and you're actually doing deliberate practice where you're breaking it down into small enough sections and you're really challenging yourself and making sure you're working on kind of component skills and building them up, I don't necessarily think in that circumstance there is much of a point to making an overly focused practice plan, because the way someone's attention is being funneled into the task is so natural that they can probably learn very effectively with that. But the problem is we're not always going to be like an 11 out of 10 on intrinsic motivation when we sit down to practice something. And this is where I found that having some structure into your practice session can be very beneficial. Because if you sit down to practice and you don't have some kind of plan for what you want to work on and how long you want to work on it for, a lot of people can just kind of stagnate. And this is where you can kind of go into naive practice mode. I have a video on my channel talking about the difference between deliberate practice and naive practice. But naive practice is essentially where you're just putting reps in. You're not very mindful or reflective about what you're doing. And you're just kind of assuming that by putting time in, you're going to be getting better. And that's not really how practice works. I'm not saying you always need an explicit conscious goal, but we kind of do need to be breaking things down and working on new challenging things. And for a lot of people, without some kind of explicit, mindfully made plan, they won't tend to use their time very effectively. They will kind of just drift and end up spending 40 minutes, replaying repertoire that they can already play. And so it's fine to spend some time farting around in the practice room. It's fine to spend some time improvising. Like I said, I do actually quite a bit of that. But in my mind, there's a distinction between just kind of doing what I feel like doing and actually sitting down and working on something. And this is where I found the practice journal is useful, not as a way to just write down what you've done, but as a way to actually plan things. And so depending on what you're working on, I think anything in the kind of 3 to 20 minute range is appropriate. So if I'm just working on something very small, like playing some arpeggios or I'm working on playing a very short lick in multiple keys, I might do just a few minutes of practice, right? And so if I'm working on something more complicated, like 16 bars of this new Bach piece, I might skew towards doing like 10 or 20 minutes of practice on that little thing. But having a practice journal where you actually make an explicit plan where I'm going to do this for 5 minutes, this for 5 minutes, this for 20 minutes, this for 10 minutes, this can make the practice session much more efficient in the sense that you're actually thinking about what you need to get done and how much time you have. And it also allows you to unlock some of the benefits of using like spaced practice, interleave practice, and getting some more variety into your practice session. And so when you actually see what your plan is written down on paper, I could purposely work on this jazz lick for 5 minutes, do something Bach, a new Bach piece for 10 or 15 minutes, come back to that jazz lick for 5 minutes, then work on a different piece, come back to that jazz lick again for 5 minutes. And so I'm injecting some spaced practice on this passage, and it just turns out to be easier to do that if you actually write this down. So that's really, I think, the main reason that I would use a practice journal is really just for planning practice sessions. And you can even plan at a larger time scale. You don't have to plan your individual sessions necessarily. You could practice what you want to get done through the week, but having a certain plan for the week, what am I going to do on which days, that can be very beneficial. The second reason I would keep a practice journal is to track problem solving. So if you are working on a challenging piece of repertoire, there's going to be problem sections that come up. They could be things that are physically hard for you to play on your instrument. There's a technical challenge. They could be things that you're having trouble audiating. Like you can't hear this chord progression in context for the life of you. Like something changes keys and then there's a new chord that comes in there and you're not hearing it properly. And so it's making your audiation of the piece clunky, and that's affecting how you perform it. There could be rhythmic problems. And so what I like to do with a practice journal is with ongoing problems, things that I don't seem to be able to solve in a couple days, maybe I can't play this section at a faster speed, I'll actually dedicate half a page or a page in a practice journal and write down, what the piece is, what the little section is. I might actually even quickly draw one bar of the notation or half of the bar of notation in the practice journal. And then I'm going to actually just document what I try to do to solve this problem. So if I'm struggling to play a piece at full speed, maybe I'll document, okay, today I did 20 minutes of this, metronome at half tempo, metronome at full tempo, metronome at beyond goal tempo. And I'll actually write down what I tried to do. And then what this does is it gives you just the benefit of being able to keep track what problem solving techniques you've actually taken advantage of. And so that's a really effective way to use a practice journal so that you're putting your mind on solving problems so that your repertoire is moving forward and you're really just getting more done in the practice room. The last way that I use a practice journal, and I think this is more in line with what people think about journaling at large, is for reflection. And so I don't do this every day. I usually do this once a week or even sometimes once every 2 weeks. But I will actually just write about how my practicing has been going, what my observations are. Am I enjoying my practice? Is my practice effective? Am I actually showing up to my practice session and embodying the musical values that I have? So for me, a value that I have in general in regards to music is using scientific and empirical knowledge to practice better. And so that fires me up. I also like being very enthusiastic in my practice. I also like incorporating a lot of improvisation. And so I use this kind of more classic journaling approach. I just write about how my practice sessions have been going. I write about, okay, my practice sessions feel really good. I'm getting a lot done towards the repertoire. This challenge has been bothering me in this piece, but I've been applying different practice techniques and I haven't solved it yet, but I feel like it's moving forward. I might brainstorm, what am I going to do for the next week of practice? What changes do I want to make? Maybe I've been too structured and I want to spend a little more time kind of improvising or just spending some time exploring dynamics and just playing the instrument in more of a meditative way. And actually just having a place where you can write these kinds of thoughts down, I think it's wonderful. And it's really interesting, actually, to look back at these. So I mean, what I tend to do is I'll do something like that once a week, and then maybe once every month or two, I'll just kind of skim through some of the old journal entries that I have. So, and then you can learn a lot about certain patterns for yourself. I mean, one time I did this, I was working on some classical repertoire, and what I noticed is that there were some speed issues on a few of these Bach tunes I was working on, and I started noticing that I wasn't really being mindful about how I was solving these problems. So I was kind of falling into like a naive practice mindset where I thought I had to keep just putting more reps in and putting more time in on these passages. And once I reread some of these journal entries, I was like, wow, you know what? I feel like I'm practicing a lot, but I'm not really getting much done. And I'm not actually experimenting very much with different problem solving techniques. And that was actually the start of what ended up getting me to solve these problems. I realized I need to try like 10 different ways of practicing this. And then I kind of documented what I tried and experimented with, and it solved the problem. And this was one of the hardest pieces I've ever learned on the classical guitar. There's a little section that I was struggling with, a little 4-bar section to play at full speed. But I wouldn't have noticed that pattern without those journal entries and looking back on it. And now what that has done is it's changed the way I think about problem solving in the future. And so, that's an example of how I used some kind of reflection to think about my own practice process. But the same thing could go for your musical values. So maybe you're being very productive in the sessions, but you're not enjoying the sessions, and part of your value system is to have fun and kind of play around a little bit more. You can take some time and reflect, like, I'm getting a lot done, but I'm not having a lot of fun. So what could I do to kind of spice things up a bit, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're having a lot of fun in the practice room, but you're not getting a lot done, and that is bothering you. I mean, if it's not bothering you, there's no problem. But having some time and having like a weekly interval where you take 10 or 15 or 20 minutes and just write about your practice session and your relationship with music, I think it's time well spent. I think it's wonderful. I mean, for me, I think it's overkill to do that every single day. It doesn't feel helpful. It doesn't feel really genuine when I do too much reflection. If I was to spend 10 or 15 minutes every single day, but something like once a week or so has been really beneficial. If I feel like I want to write about how things are going with my relationship with music or practice, then that's fine. But I try to get there in about once every week or two and kind of review my practice journal, think about how things are going. Sometimes when I'm journaling, it's just mind map form. Sometimes it's just like, this is bothering me. And then I'll draw like, just basically like a mind map. So there's many different ways you can go about it. But that's really how I've used a practice journal. And I've had some students explore some of these techniques, and it's been valuable for them too. Like I said in the beginning, the idea of just like writing down what you've already done in the practice room, it never really worked for me. If that works for you and you like having records of what you've done, then that's cool. Then go for it, use it. But I found that just using the practice journal to plan a little bit more, to track how I'm problem solving so I can focus that I'm actually using deliberate practice and growing and not just kind of putting reps in and being busy in the practice room. And then just as a general kind of classic reflection tool. So we'll wrap up here, but thanks so much for watching this video. If you have any questions or comments, hit me down below. My name is Beau. I offer piano and guitar lessons, and I also offer coaching for musicians who are trying to complete their projects or tune up their practice process, or even get better at teaching. So if that's something you're interested in, shoot me an email. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.